Game Freak, the company behind Pokemon, recently made a big splash by releasing a game that significantly departed from their bread and butter franchise. I'm not the first to review this game, and other reviews have been mixed, to say the least. And I mean that in a very literal way. People seem to absolutely love or absolutely hate this game. I'm in the former camp, but my opinion on the matter is irrelevant to your own opinion. So, since it's apparently very important for this game in particular, let's break down who Beast of Reincarnation is for, especially so we can find out if it's for you specifically. I think a large part of why this game is being perceived the way it is that its marketing and early impressions led people to believe that it's supposed to be a Sekiro clone. And to be fair, there is a lot to give that impression. The game features a parry-heavy combat system, stealth mechanics, and traversal using the main character Emma's hair that vaguely harkens to the prosthetic mechanics in Sekiro. Add to that the somberness of Beast of Reincarnation's storyline, the comparisons to From Software games were inevitable. But I believe the Sekiro comparisons are misleading. For one, From Software tends to tell stories mostly through dialogue with NPCs, item descriptions, and the like, but Beast of Reincarnation is very cutscene heavy. It's also obvious early on that this game neither is, nor does it intend to be, as hard as Sekiro. Examples of this include the inclusion of a story mode, and the fact that you can die without losing any of your resources or applying other ill effects like Sekiro's Dragon Rod. Also, the game seems to liberally borrow from other games as well, with the flowers with red petals indicating stealth areas appearing similar to the ones in Horizon Zero Dawn, and the fights with the Nushi being split into multiple stages where the monster runs away, similar to how it works in Monster Hunter. The game also wears its similarities in world building to Nier Automata on its sleeves. Hence, to call this game merely a Sekiro clone, I believe, is reductive in ways that obscure the full breadth of what Game Freak is trying to do with this game. So, if you're coming into this game expecting it to be just like Sekiro, you're definitely going to come away disappointed. Rather than blindly mimicking the way Sekiro uses its parry mechanics, the parries in Beast of Reincarnation seem to be meant more as a way to charge your large shots, either with your entanglement gauge or with your direwolf companion coup. Although poise damage does still exist, the parries exist less as a way to compete with poise damage, and more as a method of pacing the fights between your heavy-hitting moves. Once charged with flower points earned from parries, perfect dodges, and other well-timed maneuvers, you get access to big cinematic moves that do things like spring giant blossoms from the ground, or slow down time to perform a flurry of strikes, or call down lightning from the sky. These moves, summoned after charging enough resources, ends up feeling less like a Souls-like and more like a JRPG with defensive quick-time events like Costume Quest or Paper Mario, though definitely still with a Soulsy kind of flair to it. Another way these battles feel more JRPG-esque is the temporal distance between them. When you've completed a section, including partway between the fights with the final bosses of each area called Nushi, the game frequently calls you back to the Cleanse Walker, a large device that serves as your home base and safe area. When you go back to the Cleanse Walker, you're encouraged to slow down, make item preparations, especially including having meals with your partner characters, and spend time talking with the NPCs to gain access to the game's cutscenes and expository lore dumps. Frequently, Beast of Reincarnation takes you away from the core action to slow down, reflect, and focus on the story elements beyond just rushing through the game's big cinematic boss fights. The story here is clearly the focus, with the other elements serving to create a world building towards a somber, post-apocalyptic, character-driven story, exploring the connections beginning to form between people long discouraged from forming connections in favor of clinical and technical existences. The primary concern for the characters is a malady called the Blight, which is infesting animals, people, and golems, robots with human souls placed inside them, that causes them to behave aggressively. Blighted creatures and people sprout flowers as they walk, an effect somewhat reminiscent of Okami, and have plant-like elements incorporated into their body. Blighted areas are generally overrun with plant life, while the cities and colonies that people and golems inhabit tend to have a more metal, clinical, and sterile look to them. There are environmental storytelling elements, such as a cave painting I found early on, that seem to depict a time long before where people and nature lived less strictly separate lives, more towards agrarian lifestyles, living off the land, and that now the technological and natural are in competition for domination of the world. I haven't finished the game completely yet, but it appears like the game will be arguing more for a middle ground between nature and technology, but time will tell how that plays out. The game's not the most detailed graphics-wise, but the art direction frequently stuns, especially when depicting the natural beauty of the blighted areas. But another thing that impressed me was how this game seemed to want to include Ludic storytelling elements as well. For example, my first death in the game was due to looking up at the sky. At the early point in the game I wasn't even sure what was happening and just saw the screen shaking and playing an ominous noise that piqued my curiosity. Suddenly, with enough time staring into the sky, my character died. Later on, another NPC started talking with me about the dangers of looking into the sky and how it's a rule taught to children from a very young age in this world. This has immediately piqued my curiosity in a way that I wouldn't have experienced if this mechanic didn't exist. The highly vertical nature of the world traversal in-game and the openness of the first area's skyline also basically guarantees that you'll have this particular moment as well. It's not all roses, though. The execution of the story can be sloppy at times. In particular, the limited soundtrack meant to set a specific mood during exploration, since it lacks variety, gets annoying really fast. This may be a game that you want to play with music muted and your own music in the background for most of the time you're above ground. They also reuse a lot of stock resources, both in the environment and the enemy variety. Certain moments in the story also feel very familiar and tropey to those who are well-versed in anime or JRPG storytelling practices. I didn't think any of it was bad enough to ruin the effectiveness of the game's storytelling, but your own mileage may vary if you're sensitive to that kind of thing. That said, the repetition and tropiness in this game seems largely to have been done not with a specific end goal in mind, but rather as a fast way to get this game out the door. There are moments in this game that work really well and seem to have had a lot of thought put into their execution, but other elements are baffling, like introducing tutorial sections in flashbacks in the Cleanse Walker, well after you've learned the basics of combat and traversal. That kind of thing feels like it was a quick change to address a pacing issue in the story at the end of development, rather than something that was done intentionally. It's not game-breaking, but it also makes it feel like the version of the game we're playing isn't exactly the version Game Freak intended to release. There's also occasionally decisions that were made that result in grating elements. For example, the first line in the game mentions that the world has abandoned emotion to eliminate the weakness it creates in humanity. This is expressed through a clinical, flat delivery in the performances from each character. It's clearly done with intent and creates an eerie effect in the world, but it also makes it very challenging to relate to these robotic characters. If that's something you can't push through for the point they're trying to make, you'll probably want to skip out on this one. In Japanese games especially, I'm used to seeing very few configuration options in-game, as they usually target consoles first, where that kind of variability is usually unwanted and antithetical to the simplicity consoles represent. I was pleasantly surprised to see a decent spread of graphical and control customizations in this game's PC port, though. Some of those had a very strong impact on the visual quality of the game, without much to offer in ways of performance improvement, though, so I'm not sure how worthwhile each change will be to you, but they're still nice to have. This was especially true when trying this game on my Steam Deck. Officially, the game is unsupported on Steam Deck, but unofficially, it is possible to heavily crank down the settings to get additional performance out of it, and get it to a state that it's playable. It won't completely eliminate frame drops, which was a problem I had on the Steam machine as well. I also had issues with textures being slow to load, sometimes appearing on models late and causing significant slowdown as lots of textures loaded into VRAM at once, such as when running from one area to another. Outside of those moments though, the game ran on the Steam machine mostly at 60 FPS, even on high settings, though with light dips. I tend to favor medium settings to try and smooth out some of those frame drops though, and I imagine others will likely find that to be the sweet spot for them as well. As far as concerns with running the game on Linux, despite being a Windows app running through Proton, I couldn't find anything wrong with the way that this game was being run, at least not in ways I haven't seen people on Windows complain about as well. The game has a Platinum on Proton TB, so it seems that's the general experience people are having with it. The default Steam controller profile is a standard Xbox control scheme without making use of the Steam Input API. It definitely would have benefited from a proper Steam Input API inclusion though, as they have grouped actions per button in-game rather than per action. This means that changing any of the controls, especially with the face buttons, will result in oddities in the user interface. In my Steam controller profile, I wound up adding gyro controls mapped to stick output to avoid UI flickering, and placing the gyro controls in their own action layer to make some of the buttons behave more like I expected them to. But having to do this definitely feels off, so I wish they'd done more to separate actions and allowed them to be mapped in their specific contexts, like a good Steam Input API cleanly allows. I should also note that I moved attack and guard to the triggers, and if you're not fighting muscle memory like me, I don't recommend doing that. Putting guard on the trigger especially seems like it may do something to mess with the timing and make parrying less reliable, so do that with caution. If you insist on doing that, I also recommend mapping a full trigger press under soft pull to help it activate sooner for more consistent results. To sum up though, this game isn't a perfect game, but I don't consider its flaws to be a deal breaker if you're still into the kind of game that it has on offer. So, if you like a post-apocalyptic and slightly tropey JRPG, trying to experiment with the genre with more action-oriented combat, I could see you still really enjoying this game. The gameplay mechanic loop is clever, but it won't scratch the Souls-like itch that their marketing may lead you to believe it will. Definitely working better as an evolutionary branch to a general JRPG with its lower difficulty and bigger emphasis on using cinematic and powerful moves. I don't think this game is the mechanical endpoint of this style of gameplay either, and has more room to evolve, so I hope Game Freak and others continue to experiment with this loop. Also for me, I heavily appreciated the ludic elements involved in the storytelling itself. The environmental storytelling and game feel targeted towards a specific mood is the kind of stuff I most appreciate in a game, and for me this game gave me plenty to chew on, which is rare, especially in high-budget games that usually try to play things safer. I definitely see why this game is so divisive, but I liked the game. And that's my review. If you liked what I'm doing here, please be sure to give this video a like, and if not, a comment telling me so. And if you want to see more reviews like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you can see new videos like this one come down the pipeline. And as always, and most importantly, have a great day, and I hope you find some great games to play.